Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the MSCAC Talk Series. These talks are hosted by the MSCAC program, a world-class graduate program that provides employers with direct access to applied research talent. I'm very excited to introduce today's speaker, Professor Mohammed Mamdani. Mohammed is Vice President of Data Science and Advanced Analytics at Unity Health Toronto and Director of the University of Toronto Temerty Faculty of Medicine Centre for Artificial Intelligence Research and Education in Medicine, which is called T-CAIREM, and you will hear about T-CAIREM across campus. His team bridges advanced analytics, including machine learning, with clinical and management decision-making to improve patient outcomes and hospital efficiency. His talk today will cover AI in health with an emphasis on research and applications in Toronto. Mohammed, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Arvind. I'll share my screen here. I'm hoping everyone can see it. Yeah, very good. All right, it's a pleasure to be here and to give this talk about applied artificial intelligence in health. I'm going to focus on research and applications, really in the Toronto environment. My overview here is just really to cover three things. First is to provide an overview of data-driven challenges in healthcare. The second is to provide an overview of the AI and medicine landscape in Canada with a focus on the Toronto environment. And the third is to provide an overview of the applied health AI program at Unity Health Toronto. I want to start off by just kind of marveling at the miracle of modern medicine. It's absolutely incredible how with modern medicine, we can actually give the gift of sight to those people who can't see. Where people who are in car crashes who should never be able to walk, we're able to enable them to walk. Patients who have cancer who would have died literally 20 years ago, within a few months, we can now help them survive much, much, much longer. So it's incredible what we've been able to accomplish in modern medicine. That being said, it's pretty complicated. So if you really step back and think about it, the average human body is composed of cells, right? These little things. How many of these cells make up a human body? Well, the estimate is that there's about 70 to 100 trillion cells in a given body. 70 to 100 trillion. Now, in each of these cells, there's about 100 trillion atoms, right? So again, 70 to 100 trillion cells in the average human body, 100 trillion atoms in each human cell. That's a lot. And all it takes, if you believe in the butterfly effect and chaos theory, all it takes is one atom to be out of place and you have disease. So how many diseases are there? Well, there's a lot. So if you look at different sites, they'll tell you different things. The World Health Organization is suggesting about 30,000 diseases. I think a lot of sites will say there's over 10,000 diseases, and you could argue about the specificity of the disease and such, but let's say there's over 10,000 diseases. If we look at how many of these diseases we actually have treatments for, it's only a fraction. So again, depending on your categorization, if you say there's over 10,000 diseases, using that sort of thinking, there's about 500 diseases that have US FDA treatments that have been approved. That's not a lot, right? So there's a lot we don't know about disease, about medicine, about healthcare, which really makes medicine a science of uncertainty and an art of probability, to quote Sir William Osler. If we look at data in healthcare, we outpace, in terms of rate of growth anyway, there's a nice report by the Royal Bank of Canada, we outpace every other sector, right? So it's not like we're data shy or data poor. We have a lot of data in healthcare. And if we think about how we make decisions in medical care, it's actually very data-driven. So if you think about the steps that patients take, first you have to make a diagnosis, right? So you made a diagnosis, then you have to think about treatment. But how are you going to make that treatment? You have to think about prognosis in terms of how this patient's going to do. So let me walk you through a few examples. For certain things, diagnosis is very simple, very straightforward. For a lot of things, it's not that straightforward, especially given the amount of time that we have to work with. So for example, there's a study, and I believe there's one actually out of North York General Hospital here in Toronto, but there's a few studies now in asthma. And I'm sure many of you know patients who have, or know friends of family who have asthma. Maybe some people here actually have asthma. There's a study that said, I'm going to bring in over 500 patients who have been diagnosed and are being treated for asthma. And I'm going to actually do a deeper dive. So I'm going to get the proper data, spirometry tests, and a whole bunch of other stuff to really say, do you actually have asthma? Or did we maybe not get it as right as we should have? And it turns out that almost a third of these patients actually didn't have asthma. So we struggle with diagnosis every single day. Let's say I've made the correct diagnosis. How am I going to manage you? Well, if I know that you're not going to do well, I'm going to be very aggressive. I'm going to give you therapies that I know are going to be effective. They may have bad side effect profiles, but at least they'll be effective. But if I think your prognosis isn't so bad, maybe I've got a little bit of leeway. I'm going to try you with something that maybe is less toxic, gentler on you, still kind of works, but maybe not as well. But how do I make that prognosis in order to determine treatment? There's study after study after study showing how poor clinicians are at prognosis. We're awful at it. And yet, this is what drives a lot of our treatment decisions. Of course, then there's treatment, right? When you think about treatment, well, in many conditions, we don't know what to start with. So for example, in depression, we have a choice of 6, 12 drugs. There's a specific class of drugs called serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, to treat depression. Many physicians will say, I'm going to try this one, and we're going to see if it works. In multiple sclerosis, similar type of setup, right? There are many things, many options to choose from. We pick one, we don't really know how well it's going to do, and we see how things go, and then we actually tweak according to patient response. Is that a great way to do things? I don't know. I would argue there's a lot of room here because a lot of these decisions are data-driven, right? For data-driven disciplines like AI, like machine learning, to really help us to make better diagnoses, to get a better sense of prognosis, and to help us treat patients better. Lots and lots of room for AI/machine learning. What we want as clinicians is to provide the best possible care for our patients. But here's what we struggle with. What we struggle with is that we need to keep on top of the latest research findings. Right? To give you the best possible care, we need to know what that latest study was that actually showed that this works and this doesn't. But a new study is published every 2 minutes. There are over 30 million studies that have been published that we can access as clinicians. There's no way we can go through all of them. We have to constantly monitor our patients. If you think about a hospital setting, of course, every patient deserves to be monitored constantly. The reality is the average physician may spend less than 15 minutes per day reviewing a typical patient. Less than 15 minutes because of all the other responsibilities and the bureaucratic requirements or the operational requirements that clinicians have. We have to process an incredible amount of complex information from medical history, social history, labs, stuff from the monitors that we get, our orders that have been sent out, vitals, medical imaging, medications, just to name a few. They say that that a complex medical decision these days often involves processing about 1,000 different parameters. Miller in the 1950s famously concluded that the average human can only process 7 plus or minus 2 things at the same time. 1,000 parameters, we can process 7 plus or minus 2 as humans. Clearly, we need help. We need to assimilate all the right information at the right time for the right patient. We can't do that very well. So what's the consequence? There's studies out there. Our best guesses right now is currently over 30% of patients do not get treatments of proven effectiveness, and more than 1 in 5 patients will get care that is not needed or even potentially harmful. Clearly, we can do better. And you've seen the headlines, right? When do we admit Canada's healthcare system just isn't working? Wait times for medical procedures at 20-year high in Canada. Nearly 75% of Ontario doctors experienced burnout during the pandemic, survey says. 90% of nurses considering leaving the profession in the next year. You see all these stats about how in dire need we are of solutions in healthcare. We're struggling. But then you see these shimmers of hope, how AI is helping shorten patient wait times. How is data actually helping shorten wait times? We're going to get to that in a bit. There's a lot of activity in AI and health. So lots of publications, a lot of people publishing papers. If we look at 2005, there's a couple of hundred papers that were published. And, I mean, considering that's about, 17 years ago. In 2019, there were over 12,000 publications on PubMed that involved machine learning and deep learning. And it's only increasing. So these are exponential growths that we're seeing in publications. Where are we seeing the action? Pathology, radiology, surgery. But it's actually much broader than that. We're seeing activity in many, many specialties in medicine. We're also seeing actual solutions being approved by the FDA. So again, if we look at, let's say just 20 years ago, it's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 solutions that were approved by the FDA. Now we have a few hundred that are approved, and it's only going to keep increasing, which again, I think is very exciting. And of course, there's estimations around the market size, going from about 11 billion in 2021, just last year, which is expected to grow to almost 200 billion by 2030. Again, lots of potential here for growth. There's a survey of 200 US healthcare decision makers a few years ago, and they were asked about AI. And 91% of respondents believe AI will be used in clinical decision support. 84% believe companies who do not invest in AI will fall behind. 83% believe that AI will improve the accuracy of medical diagnoses. But the one statistic here that was really interesting to me, over a third of participants said they're already using AI. This is in healthcare, the sector that still uses fax machines. So we're actually using this stuff. Well, what are we doing in Canada? We have a lot of data assets. Across the country, practically every province and region actually has pretty nice data sets that many other countries would love to have. We have groups like ICS in Ontario, which assimilate healthcare data, administrative data for the entire province. Data initiatives in Alberta, broader organizations like Genome Canada that have really taken a foundational approach in consolidating data around genomics, and Alberta Health Services, which has taken the bold step of saying, as an entire province, we're going to bring together our data to make it more powerful and usable to help our patients. The particular hospitals and organizations, I'm just highlighting SickKids here, that have really went forward and said, we really want to leverage data. We're actually going to be using AI aggressively. So we have quite a bit of data assets in Canada. We also have technical expertise. We have 3 world-leading AI institutes, the Vector here in Toronto, Amy in Alberta, and Mila in Montreal. We also have groups that are trying to get us to collaborate. So I'm going to be telling you about the Temerty Centre for AI Research in Education Medicine, or T-CAIREM, at the University of Toronto in just a bit. And of course, there are lots of groups trying to translate. How do we take research and translate it into practice? There's companies like Blue Dot, Signal One, Deep Genomics that are actually really trying to leverage AI and machine learning to be able to translate it to patients and improve patient care. I'm going to be highlighting an example at Unity Health Toronto, that's the institution I'm from, around how we're actually the first, and as far as I know, the only hospital and healthcare organization in the country that has declared AI as a strategic pillar and a priority. And I'll tell you about what we're doing at that end. If I paint the picture around the Toronto environment, the University of Toronto is fantastic, right? We have one of the best statistics departments in the world. Our comp sci department is one of the best in the world. Engineering is among the best in the world. Education, I think, ranks top 5 in the world. Medicine ranks top 5 in the world. Why am I highlighting these programs? Because AI in medicine is about context and content. The technical expertise that's needed comes from stats, comp sci, engineering. The contextual expertise comes from medicine and education. We need to bring all these together to be able to leverage AI in medicine. We have groups like ICS, world-class research institution with tons of data. Vector Institute, again, having technical expertise that is world-leading in this space. But we also have a very, very rich health and health data environment with the Toronto Academic Health Science Network. Basically, this network spans U of T and affiliated academic hospitals. There's 14 academic hospitals involved. There's community hospitals involved as well, where we basically actually meet regularly and talk and see if we can actually collaborate on things. So very nice environment where we have healthcare institutions and as well as technical expertise to come together. Just a few examples of what's happening around the University of Toronto community. Again, there's lots more than this, but I'm just picking a few examples here and there. At the Toronto General Hospital, we have some pretty brilliant researchers who have created an algorithm that can predict 1 in 5 year survival with likely causes of death among patients who get a lung transplant. Because patients who get a lung transplant are at a high likelihood of dying. But if we know what their rates are, if we know the causes of death, we can actually try and prolong life or at least set expectations for our patients. In breast cancer, one of the things we struggle with is, we pick a regimen and we hope that all patients do well, but the reality is not all patients will do well. We'll wait a few weeks, realize the therapy isn't working out, then switch to another one. Maybe that'll work. Then maybe switch to another one. Maybe that'll work. And as the disease is progressing, we're still trying to figure out what will work for this patient. Well, researchers at Sunnybrook have an algorithm that predicts response to chemotherapy with 96% accuracy that could potentially be used to help patients. There's an interesting surgeon actually at TGH, Toronto General Hospital, or University Health Network, that's using AI-guided surgery. It's in protocol still, prototype development, still, but really, really exciting here. So the concept here is very simple. As he's operating on that bile duct, you can actually see these green areas where it's saying it's safe to cut here, but don't cut in the red areas. Because if you cut in the red areas, you have a much higher likelihood of having a major bile duct injury. So it actually is guiding the surgeon in terms of where to cut and where not to cut, so you can have a safer procedure and have better outcomes for patients. Really, again, really interesting, exciting stuff. The problem here is we're all doing this work in silos. So a lot of us don't really talk, despite having TASN where we meet regularly and talk about activities, it's not focused on AI. And I'd love for organizations to be able to consolidate efforts, to be able to talk to each other and really coordinate and work together to be able to bring AI medicine together more broadly. So we actually had a very generous donation through the Temerty family to say, we think there is a lot of room for people to collaborate. And they've put in quite a bit of resource, over $20 million, specifically focused on T-CAIREM, or the Temerty Centre for Artificial Intelligence Research and Education Medicine, to bring people together and have a more consolidated effort around AI medicine. So this is where I'm going to talk to you about T-CAIREM. What we have here is 3 themes that we've established. The first is education. So we launched officially in 2020, and we've launched with speaker series where every month we have world-renowned speakers from institutions like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Oxford, where everyone's invited to hear them talk about AI medicine. We have a learner series where we get students to come together, students from medicine, from engineering, from computer science, from statistics, all coming together, meeting regularly and talking about their projects and collaborating with each other. We've offered 20 studentships over the summer last year. We're offering 30 this year, where any student, undergrad or grad, can work with a U of T faculty member in machine learning or AI for the summer. And of course, lots of activity going on in developing training materials and workshops and such. Our second theme is research, where we have our grants. We typically offer, now we're at about $750,000 or so in research funding every year, where our goal is to increase that to $1 million. Where we've had lots of innovative ideas that are now being funded through T-CAIREM funding. Here are just a couple of examples of the types of things that we funded. And of course, then there's infrastructure. We really believe that in order to really advance AI, we have to have a nice environment to be able to conduct AI or machine learning. What that means is data. Right now, everyone, as far as we know, kind of pokes and prods at different data sources and brings them on their laptop, and it's not really great for compute, and it's a bit discombobulated. So we're just now launching the Health Data Nexus on Google Cloud. We're spending anywhere from $3 to5 million over the next 3 to 5 years to really, really foster this environment to be the go-to place for research, for datathons, for even assignments for academics to say, hey, you know what, go to the Health Data Nexus, here's a bunch of data sets. This is your assignment, it's due in 2 weeks. and you'll have sufficient compute power because it's on Google Cloud. And it'll be an environment where people can actually go to actually conduct experiments and run machine learning models on actual data sets that are related to medicine and healthcare. So that's an exciting development as well, being able to bring that together. If you haven't been on our website yet, I'd really encourage you to do so. Anyone can become a member as long as you're at an academic institution and you're a student or faculty. You can become a member of T-CAIREM and you'll have access to all these sorts of things. And we'll actually send you newsletters around when our events are. The other thing that we're really, really focused on is community. So currently we have over 1,000 members as being part of T-CAIREM across U of T and affiliated GT institutions, but also across the country now that I'm just going to tell you about in just a bit. How do you get all these people together? We have these initiatives called Collaboration Hub. That's one of them, where it's like a Kijiji for AI in medicine. So anyone can put a posting. So it's just a one-page thing that you have to fill out. And for example, you can be a neurologist at Sunnybrook and say, hey, I'm a neurologist. I've got 4,000 head CTs. I have clinical expertise, but I don't know what a 3D convolutional neural network is. And I know I want to do something in machine learning. Does somebody want to work with me? And I don't have any funding. They can post, and then the computer science community can say, you know, I have funding, I have time, but I don't have clinical expertise or data. Why don't I work with you and we can do something really incredible together? So we can actually make these marriages, bring people together just through people who would normally not work together. We have about a dozen of these that we've received. We've already matched about half a dozen, and we'll continue to match more and more people as time goes on. The other thing we have is Hive Hubs, where anyone can start an interest group. So if you're interested in, let's say AI and fairness, and you have 4 other people who want to form a group, that's good enough. We need about 5 people to start. We provide the platform. We'll help you through support. But what we'll ask you is, how often do you want to meet and how many people are allowed to be in your group? And you can tell us, I want 50 people and we're going to meet monthly and I'm going to chair it. And we'll say, all right, what are your 6-month objectives? We'll actually help you set that group up so you can lead in the area that interests you and invite other people to join you in that interest group. Provides a great opportunity for especially up-and-comers, young folks who are really passionate about certain areas in AI medicine. We'll provide the platform to do that. We're just launching, so we don't have too much traction just yet, but we're hoping to do so within the next year. The other thing that's really exciting about T-CAIREM is that we've opened it up nationally. So currently we have 23 institutions from all across the country that are part of T-CAIREM and affiliated organizations. So there's over 30 organizations now across Canada that are part of T-CAIREM. This is a fairly recent development, so we expect to have a few thousand members in the very near future for T-CAIREM, making it, from my knowledge, the largest AI medicine network in the world, which again is very, very exciting. Internationally, we just recently signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with Technion University in Israel. We're also in discussions now with one other international entity to see if we can sign an MOU with them. And our plans are to sign a few more of these to expand our relationships and our collaborations globally, which again, I think is going to be very exciting. So again, I would encourage everybody to visit our website, become a member of T-CAIREM. There's lots of resources available in terms of how we actually advance AI in medicine. The other thing I'll note is that we're also part of the Alliance of Centers for Artificial Intelligence Medicine. This is basically a group that meets, I believe we meet monthly. There's over 50 AI medicine centers globally that come together to be able to talk about what we're doing and what we're envisioning. It's really exciting because earlier this year, we had a conference in California, and AI and Med, which is the conference group that brought a lot of us together, we were awarded the Institution of the Year. So T-CAIREM was awarded out of all these places all around the world, the Institution of the Year, which was, again, very exciting and acknowledging the presence that Canada has, that T-CAIREM and University of Toronto has in the global stage around AI medicine. So again, I encourage everyone to be part of T-CAIREM and part of this community so we can advance this space. That was T-CAIREM in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions around it, but I'm going to now start focusing on a lot of this is great to talk about, but much of what I'm showing you is research. it hasn't been translated effectively well. And one of the reasons why is because when we do nice papers in pristine academic settings, it's wonderful. But when you go to translate in reality, it's hard. It's really, really, really hard. Just as a case example, this is a recent study that was published last year, where what they did was they looked at hundreds of AI tools that have been developed to catch COVID during the pandemic. And I think the article reviewed over 400 solutions, 400 publications. And what the authors did was they actually did something really interesting. They went through each of these papers and they said, how many of these could actually be deployed into clinical practice and be useful? And the answer was 0. None of them, right? Why? Because there's lots of other considerations when you actually go to deploy into clinical practice. I'm going to focus on, for the purposes of this section, I'm going to focus on our hospital at Unity Health Toronto, St. Michael's Hospital. St. Michael's, this is where I'm from. I'm based at this site of Unity. We're a tertiary care teaching hospital in downtown Toronto. We established in 1892 with the founding goal of taking care of the sick and the poor. So we're basically Toronto's inner city hospital. We're one of 2 adult trauma centers in the greater Toronto area. We have about 500 beds and numerous outpatient clinics, about 6,000 staff, over 900 physicians, over 1,600 nurses. Our approximate annual patient volumes, we have about 80,000 emergency department visits, over 500,000 ambulatory visits, over 25,000 inpatient visits. Why am I telling you all of this? If you multiply this by 15, because we have 15 years of historical data, that's a lot of data to work with, right? So a lot of data sitting there with captive patients in our hospital, because not that they want to be there, but they have to be there. We also have a research institute and we're fully affiliated with the University of Toronto. All right, so I'm going to give you a case example of how we're actually developing these solutions. Managing emergency department volumes has always been a problem. It pretty much is in practically every emergency department in the country. So our emergency department leadership came to us and they said, we want a solution that will be able to help us anticipate how many patients we have. Here's our problem. A couple of times every month, we get these surges that we did not expect to see, and it's pandemonium. There's so many patients. And if we had known earlier, we would have had more nurses, more staff there, asked our physicians to work another hour or two in addition, just to kind of ease the crunch. But we get blindsided and we don't know. So if we knew how many patients were coming to our emergency department, if you could predict for us how many patients are coming, we can improve staffing and decrease wait times. So of course we said, sure. What we've done is we actually looked at 4 years of historical data. We actually have an algorithm that scrapes the web for weather data. So is there a snowstorm happening tomorrow? Are the Raptors playing in the Scotiabank Arena? City planning events are scraped as well. Is there a marathon happening at Lakeshore Boulevard? We grab all of that data and we continually update the predictions using machine learning models to be able to predict how many patients are going to come to the emerge. So the algorithm is pretty nice. What we can do is we can tell you, today's Monday, we can tell you Wednesday from noon to 6, there'll be 82 patients waiting in the emergency department. 10 of them will have mental health issues. 12 of them will be high acuity and the rest will be easier to manage. Our accuracy typically is 94 to 96%, which is wonderful, right? So then we actually create the solution. We have this nice dashboard up that basically tells our staff, here are the expectations over the next 3 days, because that's what they wanted to see. And we also have 7-day and monthly predictions as well. But this gives them a sense of the volumes to accept around arrivals, mental health patients, and boarded patients. What boarded patients means is that you've made the decision to admit them, but we don't have any beds available. So they have to wait a little bit until we get a bed cleaned. It's these sorts of things that are really important to the emergency department folks. And this is what's really helped improve staffing and decrease wait times. But that's not the entire story. So here's what really happened. The emergency department people came to us and they said, all right, so here's our problem. And of course, arrogant people that we are, we said, go sit down, have a coffee. We're going to do this incredible math magic, and we're going to come back to you with these fabulous predictions, and it'll solve all of your problems. So we did. And we spent weeks looking at the data, coming up with these forecasting models. We went back to our emergency department leadership and said, here's the solution to all of your problems. You're welcome. And they looked at our models and our output and they said, this is absolute rubbish. We can't use any of this. Number one, you didn't even model the things that we want to see. Number two, you do realize that we don't meet every 2 minutes, right? We have actually certain times where we do staffing and such, so we need this information at certain time points. And you don't even know what our workflow is like. They were right. We were predicting the wrong things with the wrong data and giving them the wrong output. So this is where we had to step back and say, this is all wrong. We need actually a co-creation model. So we actually said to them, can you work with us? So our model is that you actually tell us what you need, and you meet with us every 2 weeks for however long it takes to create the solution and give us your expertise so we actually develop something for you that you actually will use. That's where we had our co-creation. And that's where we were able to generate models that gave useful information with an acceptable amount of accuracy that would fit into their workflow. So everybody got excited. And they said, this is amazing. Now we can actually finally have information that we need. And we said, great, but how are we going to get this to you? And they said, put it on a dashboard. We said, okay, what do you want the dashboard to look like? And they said, we want all of your output on it. And we said, there's over 100 data points on here in terms of output. You want all of it? They said, we want all of it. We said, I don't know if that's a good idea, but okay, we'll put all of it on the dashboard. And I got to say, the first dashboard we created, it was hideous. It was just horrible, but nobody said anything because it felt like home, because we all created it together. So nobody used it because it was just too much. There's too much information going on and nobody could process it at time. I don't know if you've been to an emergency department, but it is chaos. You need information quickly to use it effectively. So this is where we started thinking, nobody's using this. It's been a month. Clearly there's, and they like the predictions. Clearly there's a problem translating it. So we actually brought in human factors folks, design people, who actually were fairly military actually, and said, you don't get 100 data points, you get 9. What are the 9 that you want? So they actually were able to land on the 9. And they talked about font and colors and that sort of stuff. Then they created this dashboard that would give really nice, easy visuals where they could look at it quickly, make decisions, and move on. That's what it took really to drive change, to result in improved staffing and decreased wait times. So I'm going to give you a quick overview in terms of how we're set up. We have this we created this data environment. It took us 3 years to build an environment that would be amenable to AI medicine. So we actually have deep learning servers. We have data pipelines that we've built. We've got software, Python, R, PyTorch, TensorFlow. We've got all those things that the data scientists need. We hired a whole team of data scientists, but we did this with intent. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations will hire data scientists, but they won't build the environment they need properly. So the data scientists will then get frustrated and say, I'm just doing data cleaning all day. That's not what you hired me for. You're right. That's not what we hired you for. So we actually have to build it in a smart way. But what a lot of people do is they stop here and they don't go to the other side. The environment, absolutely critical. You can create the best prediction algorithm in the world. Nobody's going to use it if you don't do proper change management. But how do you do proper change management and get people to use these things? People have to be part of the process in developing these things to be convinced that they're important and they're usable. So our model is very simple. We let the end users, the clinicians, the frontline staff lead. How we're structured is I'm the Vice President of Data Science and Advanced Analytics at Unity Health, and I have a few core teams. The first is the data integration and governance team. This is where we have data engineers, ETL developers, data modelers, and architects. They do the data wrangling. They grab the data from source systems in real time, scrub it, clean it in real time, feed it to the second group, which is the advanced analytics team. That's where computer scientists, our operations first engineers, our statisticians are. They do the modeling because they shouldn't be spending their time cleaning the data and accessing it. They should be focused on modeling. And of course, once the models are developed, how do you develop human factors friendly solutions? Well, we have a product development team that's headed up by a person who focuses on design, who focuses on things like software and human factors and how do you actually make something that people want to use. So they all work together very closely. And in fact, the first place we typically start when a project idea comes about is the product development team. Walk us through what you want to see. How should it feel? How does it work into your workflow? Then we figure out what data we need and what the modeling is. We're getting a lot of pressure to commercialize things. And I'll tell you a story about that in just a bit. But we have a very small commercialization team of one person where we're expecting to grow a bit. And of course, one of the things that I think it's fair to say, because myself as a researcher, we're the worst at time management and project management. So we have a project management team that is more focused on timelines, milestones, deliverables, lean processes to make sure that we actually develop and deploy solutions with a reasonable amount of time. So what's the process? The project ideas and questions come from end users. They do not come from the data science and advanced analytics team. So they do not come from our data scientists. They come from our frontline, our decision makers. How we prioritize projects is when a person comes up with an idea, we say, great idea, write it up for us. Explain to us what your issues are, what you're struggling with, how these things will help, what your future state will be if we developed a solution for you. And so the way we pick things is proposals that have potential to improve outcomes and reduce costs are first priority, improve outcomes at no additional cost are second priority, reduce costs without harming patients are third priority, and then everything else we have time and energy for. All projects have to have senior leadership sign off. So what that means is if somebody comes to us with an idea, if they're the only ones who think it's a good idea, it's probably not a good idea. So we really require your medical director, your program director, your division department head, all to sign off and say, this is an important issue for us. If you develop a solution, we're committed and dedicated to using it. Typical project duration is 3 to 6 months. Some projects take much longer. Some projects don't take as long, but we typically aim for 3 to 6 months. And our current project portfolio is about 10 to 15 projects at any point in time. This is a quick snapshot of things. We have developed and deployed over 40 solutions now that are live and in production as we speak. So we're quite active in actually developing these sorts of solutions. But the way we pick projects, we do them in all sorts of areas, from the emergency department to surgery to general internal medicine. We're all over the place. We don't really pick one area and dive deep in it. We actually go where the passion and the energy is. So if we know that our end users are really passionate, that they're engaged and they really want this, we pick that project because that's what's going to drive change. Just as a few quick examples, I'm going to start off with a clinical example. So this is based on a patient that was actually at our hospital about 4 or 5 years ago. 73-year-old retired banker with an inflamed gallbladder or cholecystitis was an internal medicine patient. This is a fairly kind of common condition we see. Shouldn't be too tough to manage. We should have them out home and discharged the next day. They had an advanced gastrointestinal procedure done. That evening, the physician was called because the patient had a shortness of breath. So the physician ordered chest x-rays and labs. Vital signs were checked twice overnight, and the physician was called at 8:30 a.m. the next morning because of a sudden drop in blood pressure. The patient unfortunately deteriorated and died that day. The family was understandably distraught and said we would never have left his bedside. The reality is 1 in 12 internal medicine patients will die in the hospital. So what can we do? Well, our internists have told us we could have increased monitoring. We could have looked for signs of sepsis, a bad infection, and we could have initiated antibiotics. We could have called the critical care response team just to give them a heads up and say, get familiar with this patient just in case you need to manage them very last minute so you're prepared. We could have called the palliative care team. If we knew this patient was going to die, at least they could have died a comfortable, dignified death. And of course, we could have communicated. We could have done all of this so much earlier, but we didn't know. The reality is, in internal medicine, about half of your patients will deteriorate unexpectedly. Sorry, not half your patients. Out of the patients who deteriorate, half of them are unexpected. So the other half you kind of expect, but out of the ones that deteriorate, about half of them, we didn't really know. So can we predict who will die so we can intervene earlier? And so we have. We have an early warning system at St. Michael's Hospital. And right now it's active in our general internal medicine unit. We just recently launched it on another unit, and we're going to be seeing expansion into other units as well as St. Joseph's Hospital in the new year. It's very exciting because what this algorithm does is it runs every hour on the hour. It's been trained on about 20,000 patients worth of data. And it grabs typically about 100 or so features and it ingests them, and it runs every hour on the hour. It's all automated. So what it does is it categorizes patients as low, medium, and high risk. So red, yellow, and green. As soon as it reaches the high risk threshold, it's automated to page the medical team. Our protocol is the medical team has to go and see that patient within the 2 hours of being paged, and then they have care pathways that then they consider and assess the patient. So we deployed this in October of 2020. And again, this is live running as we speak, every hour on the hour. And we started getting emails like this from our attendings. The resident on call overnight received a high-risk alert around 11 p.m. She went and reviewed the chart and saw the patient as per the recommended protocol. He was relatively stable. So maybe it was a false alarm. Approximately 2 hours later, she received a call from the nurse that the patient was decompensating. As she already knew the patient, she was able to quickly assess at the bedside and get the ICU team involved. The patient went to the ICU, but did not thankfully have a respiratory arrest, which was certainly a risk if the intervention had not been done as quickly. The resident feels that the AI program made a big impact. That's fine. But what about mortality? So these are our mortality rates among high-risk general internal medicine patients. This is before we deployed ChartWatch. If we look at January to March of 2020, this is when we first started seeing COVID patients. If we look at the 4 years prior to that, so January, March of 2016 to 2019, in 2020, we saw a 35% increase in mortality. April to June, we had many more COVID patients. We saw a 70% increase in mortality. July to September was a good summer, fewer COVID patients, but we still saw a 37% increase in mortality. That's where we said it's enough. We deployed ChartWatch. And despite seeing many more COVID patients in our hospital, we saw reductions in mortality rates. So this is where we're very excited. And we thought, these things could actually potentially save lives. And actually not potentially, we're actually seeing the impacts at our hospital. So just some considerations around deployment, performance metrics, and evaluation. First thing is a lot of people will focus on things like AUCs. And I will often kind of smile at that and say, that's great. It doesn't really mean that much to me. If we take very simple metrics, I'm going to focus on one of the points here called clinical validation. My question is relative to what? So if you tell me, I'm going to use something very simple for the sake of argument here, accuracy. If you tell me that this algorithm has 96% accuracy, I'm going to turn around and tell you that's garbage. It's completely useless because our doctors have 98% accuracy. It's not very helpful. But if you tell me another algorithm has 76% accuracy, I'll say that's incredible because our doctors have a 62% accuracy. So it's all related to relative to what? If you're performing poorly in an environment, there's so much room to actually improve that a moderately performing algorithm will be incredibly useful. So clinical validation becomes very important. How does your algorithm perform to the standard of care that you're currently giving? Then, of course, there's all sorts of things like false alarms. When we looked at early warning systems that other people have deployed, we noticed that early warning systems will alarm 10 to 20 times a day. Our clinicians will say, nope, too many false alarms. We're just not even going to listen to it. ChartWatch alarms once or twice a day. That's it. And that's why our clinicians have bought in, because they told us, do not bother us so much. We're so busy. We can't be bothered with so many false alarms and go on wild goose chases. And they're right. So you have to cater to what they're comfortable with. You're going to jump over to privacy and confidentiality. You can imagine a bunch of data scientists having access to very sensitive information. In the research environment, we get de-identified data. That doesn't work in the deployment environment. We need to know it's Mr. Jones who's going to die, not a number that we can't identify. So there is access to identifiable information that's needed for many points along the journey. And how do you actually build a data governance and access framework that enables that? Risk and liability, you can imagine the conversations with the physicians. If this algorithm says this patient's going to die and I do nothing and they die, do I get sued? So of course, legal discussions, all sorts of risk management issues that had to be dealt with, bias and equity, some practical considerations. We can say that our algorithm performs just as well among young versus old because we have age data, among males versus female because we have sex data, among sick and not so sick because we have clinical features. We don't have good data on race. We don't have good data on socioeconomic status. We don't have good data on gender or education level. We can't tell you if it performs just as well or poorly. So there are gaps. But does that mean we don't deploy? I would argue in some cases, yes, but in many cases, no, we deploy anyway. And we try to do the best we possibly can. Because right now, if an ethicist was to tell me, you should have actually done all this due diligence before you deploy ChartWatch, my response would be, I can remove ChartWatch and see those mortality rates increase again. Is that ethical? Just in the off chance that maybe our algorithm doesn't perform well among one race versus another. So again, lots of discussions around bias, equity, fairness, and ethics. Just a few other examples that I'll actually leave time for questions. Nurse staffing is really, really important these days in the healthcare sector. How do we optimize nurse staffing? Well, we developed an algorithm that actually helps with staffing optimization. We deployed it to 2 hospitals a couple of years ago with an estimated annual cost reduction of about $1 million a year. Very simple, helps us provide better care, more efficient care with cost savings. We have an algorithm for our patients in our one of our surgery units, where we see a lot of patients with diabetes. And one of the big problems we have among our patients with diabetes is their blood pressure drops quite a bit and they have hypoglycemia. And you can run into a lot of problems with severe hypoglycemia, like diabetic coma. It's not fun. So how do you decrease the episodes of hypoglycemia? Well, we have nurses who are focused on managing these patients, but what they struggle with is, who do we educate first? Who do we actually go and intervene on first? Because we have so many patients to see. So we have an algorithm that every single morning, it actually generates an email list and that sends it to our nurse practitioners and says, here's the list of high-risk patients. So if you don't have much time, focus on these patients first, then worry about the others. So it does this every morning and it continues to run. Our nurses really like this. And we've actually measured outcomes. We've asked them, what's important to you? And they said, look, if we have on any given week, let's say we have a bunch of weeks, if we can have less than 5% of patients experience a hypoglycemic event, that would be great. We said, okay, that seems like a reasonable benchmark. So we looked at, prior to this algorithm being deployed, we found that about 9 to 10% of weeks that we looked at had more than 5% of patients experiencing the event. We deployed the algorithm and there were 0 weeks with that metric. It's not to say people are not having hypoglycemic events, they are, but the variance has dropped considerably, and so has the event rate, which is really exciting. Other algorithms, multiple sclerosis. Our residents and our fellows have trouble keeping up with things because their patients are relatively new to them often. So, they don't know the 7-year history of Mr. Smith because they only have 10 minutes to review it because they just saw a patient and the next Mr. Smith is being seen at 4:10 p.m. So what we've done is we've created something called Muskrat. What it does is it uses advanced natural language processing methods to, I think it takes about 2 or 3 seconds. It literally goes through 7 or 8 years of history of a patient, and it summarizes in visual form the key things the physician needs to know. So it's able to tell you the patient had a relapse here and here, and look, they had 3 relapses in the past 2 years. They have new T2 lesions in their brain, according to their radiology reports, and they had 2 of them show up in the past 2 years. You tried them on this drug, didn't quite work, so you switched them here 4 years ago, and now they're on these meds, all in graphical form. So they're interested in one thing, they can click on it and pull up the entire clinic note so they can do a deep dive. All this is done again within a few seconds. The last example that I'll give is around medical imaging. So with vision learning, we have this algorithm. In our emergency department, if you come in with a brain bleed, it typically takes about 3 or 4 hours at the earliest for a radiologist to be able to make a diagnosis to say this patient is bleeding in their brain. So you can imagine this patient sitting there for 3 or 4 hours with the bleed in their brain. And this is quite a bit better than a lot of other hospitals. We can do better. So we have an algorithm now that listens for their head CT, and it grabs the CT image and it detects, is there a bleed, yes or no, the subtype and where it's located, all within 1 minute. It then talks to our radiology information system, color codes that patient in purple, and moves them right to the top of the radiologist queue. What we've been able to see is about a 70% reduction in radiology diagnosis time for those patients, which means better care. How we've been able to do this is a 3-pronged approach. We have an AI lab where we focused on building the environment to enable machine learning, but we've also then really created a living lab where we focused on how do we engage our end users. They should be leading, they should be driving because they know what the problems are. How do you have a data governance strategy that enables that? Balancing access and privacy. Then we spent a lot of time on machine learning operations. The thing that very few people talk about, that's where a lot of the action is. The data engineering, the data pipelines, getting all those things ready and prepped. We have a whole team that does that. So critical to be able to enable AI medicine. And of course, then how do you get it to other hospitals? The emergency department example that I gave you, we actually gave our code to a few hospitals and they weren't able to execute because people there aren't trained in Python. They weren't trained in machine learning models. They weren't trained in how you do a lot of things. And so we would have to jump in and become their IT help desk and support and stuff. That just is not practical for a public entity to do. We have our own issues to deal with at our own hospital. So we decided there has to be a better way to this. We actually launched a startup called Signal One in April of this year. And they will focus on how do you take these solutions and actually then deploy them in other hospitals so other hospitals can benefit from these solutions. That got us to thinking, there should be more of these. We should actually develop an AI accelerator. And that's what we're working on now, of how we actually bring startups to our environment, give them access to data, our clinicians, and work with our team in a very secure manner to be able to generate more solutions that can then be spun out and be given to the rest of the world. All of this with the end goal of providing better care for all of us, because I think that's what we all deserve. And I will end there and take questions. I think there's a few in the Q&A, so I'm just going to review those.
Yeah, so please add your questions. Mohammed, there are 3 questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, so the first one is, what's the potential for startups in biotech and AI in Canada? How to find co-founders and lab space now? Looking forward to opening SR Institute for Space. Yeah, I think the startup space is actually pretty rich. The only problem is that the vast majority of these startups will fail, right? And when we look at the CDL, their experience is that there's a few things that really become important for startups. The first is asking the right questions, so having the clinical context. The second is access to data. A lot of people struggle with that. And the third is around access to clinicians to help them build those solutions. So I would say before you think about startups, I would really focus on how you actually have a right environment to actually develop your solution, how you have the right partners. And there is a pretty healthy appetite for that. I would go on T-CAIREM. I would join that community. We're actually going to be getting into the commercialization startup space in the coming years. That will be a rich environment to actually build some capacity there. Second one is, can undergrad computer science students join T-CAIREM? Absolutely, we more than welcome you. So please be part of our community. Next one is, you mentioned the studentship is open to graduate students. However, T-CAIREM website says the students who will be in a grad program in May 2023 are not eligible for studentship in May 2023. I think we might have changed that, so I apologize. It may be focused on undergrad, so I'm going to go back and actually double check. But if you are a grad student and you are interested, there are other opportunities as well. So feel free to reach out to me. I can link you up with our administrators, Oriana, to figure out how we can get you engaged and what sort of support opportunities we have there. And how can we join the AI lab, bring project ideas to the table? I think we're a bit kind of cognizant around where the ideas come from, and how we actually partner people is a bit methodical in terms of getting the end users to come in. If you're a clinician, we really kind of take your ideas well. If you're a computer scientist, we do, but we want to pitch your ideas to our clinicians and see if they bite. If you have a terrific idea or you want to be engaged, feel free to reach out to me directly and I can connect with you and see if we can advance things. How's the response from the medical professionals? Did they find it easy to adopt? I got to say, it's actually a little bit mixed. So we always have our health professionals typically lead our projects. So the ones who come in to us are already engaged, but there's collateral there, right? So what I mean is, with this ChartWatch thing, our internists came to us and said, we want this. When we developed the solution, we went to our nurses, they said, we do not want this, because they basically said, it's going to create so much work for us, because you're going to tell us, you're going to alarm this patient, you're going to tell us to monitor much more frequently. We already have a million things to do. We don't want it. And we finally slowly convinced them to say, just try it out. And within 2 weeks, we had the nurses say, this is the best thing ever. Because what it does is it allows me to allocate my nursing resources more effectively, because now I can assign a senior nurse to a high-risk patient better because I know who the high-risk patients are. So it's actually helped with staffing allocations, and it's actually helped them to focus their care more. And so now, ironically, nurses are our biggest advocates. It's that change management that has to happen. And the only way to do it is through engagement. Yeah. And I think that's it for questions.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think, Mohammed, you saw some questions are from the MSCAC students who might be interested in coming over and doing some things with T-CAIREM. And so they are starting their research projects on May 1st. So yeah, we can have, I don't know if we have projects from you guys posted this year, but definitely be interested in talking with you about that. Oh, you've got 2 more questions.
Yeah, I just want to say, actually, we do often take, I don't think we're taking any this year, but we usually take MSCAC students, and we love them. Your MSCAC program is fantastic. In fact, I think a couple of them actually we ended up hiring. But so, Dr. Mamdani, I'm a student in statistics. Okay, I want to participate in research or practice opportunities. How many opportunities will be open to undergrads? So again, I think the summer studentships, I would definitely tackle those because they're made for students like you. So go on the T-CAIREM website, become a member, apply for those studentships. Can students across other campuses join the research projects? Absolutely. So we're very open. As you know, as I'd mentioned, T-CAIREM is now open to 23 universities across the country. And if for whatever reason your university is not involved, reach out to me, to Zoriana. We'll actually more than happy to talk to your leadership around how your institution can be involved in T-CAIREM.
Mohammed, thanks again for coming and speaking with us today. Thanks everybody for joining us at today's talk, and have a good evening.
Thanks everyone.